Gentlemen, the hour of convening has arrived. We have a quorum, so we're going to call this meeting to order. And first readers, let me see, I had some requests for going first. Do we have somebody can function as secretary and read House Bill 622, please, Mr. Vice Chair? Representative Smith with us? There he is. Okay. I'll be calling on you in just a minute. You can go ahead and stand up here if you want. 622.
House Bill 622 by Representative Smith and others to amend Article 2, Chapter 7, Title 48 of the Official Code relating to income tax imposition rate, computation, and exemptions.
Chair recognizes Representative Smith. Tell us a little bit about that bill, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll assure you I'll behave if you behave, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Appreciate that. My apologies accepted, correct? My apologies accepted. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Glad to have you, Mr. Smith, and we appreciate your
thank you for accepting my apologies. I bring to you a simple bill to get on them into a subcommittee.
Is that microphone on? I can't tell.
Does you hear me now?
Can you see a red light?
It's on. Red light's on.
Okay.
Test. Okay. We're on.
We're on. Okay. Proceed.
Are you playing with me because of the nature of the...
I couldn't hear you good. I honestly
Mr. Chairman, I bring to you House Bill 622, and we joke about hearing a good bit, but this one is really a serious matter. Typically, hearing aids will last 2 years, 3 years before technology becomes much better. And so in my particular case, I'll buy a set of hearing aids every 2 to 2.5 years at the cost of $5,000 to $6,000 per pair, and some will pay from $2,000 to $3,000 a pair up to $5,000 to $6,000 to $7,000. What this will do is for those people that buy hearing aids, they can get a tax credit of $500, and there's no insurance that I know of that pays for hearing aids. There's no offset at all. So, and from the IRS code, I think we're able to write them off over a period of time, but certainly not during the life of the aid. But I appreciate your consideration to put it in the subcommittee, sir.
Thank you. Would the gentleman yield any questions? Are there any questions? Any member of the committee? We'll be assigning that, Representative Smith, and we thank you for that presentation. And we do realize,
and thank you for being so kind to me, sir.
All joking aside, it is a serious matter, and we're going to assign that to our Income Tax Committee. Thank you. Mr. Secretary, first readers, who do we have? Mr. Lindsay, is he here? Mr. Lindsay here? House Bill 566, please, sir.
House Bill 566 by Representative Lindsay to amend Code Section 368261 of the Official Code relating to definition of terms used in Article 3, Chapter 82, Title 36, known as the Revenue Bond Law, so to enlarge the definition of undertaking to include the establishment of a trust fund to liquidate the unfunded accrued actuarial liability for pension and other post-employment benefits.
Chair recognizes Representative Lindsay to summarize this bill, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very briefly, House Bill 566 simply provides local governments with additional flexibility in complying with GASB 45 regulation from the Governmental Accounting Board. It is supported by ACCG and GMA. It's neutral, but we're all working on them. With the Chairman's permission, I'd like to pull in a lawyer's lawyer, my bond lawyer on this matter, Mr. Bruce Bowers, who can explain to you the details on the bill real briefly on how it will work in the local government system.
We'll be glad to take testimony at the subcommittee hearing time, and we're glad to have Mr. Bowers. We know him to be quite a credible expert and look forward to hear from him. We just need a summary from you to begin with, and we'll assign it to a subcommittee.
That's essentially all it will do. The one change we will at subcommittee there, it was a scrivener's error, and it is mine. Section 2 should be deleted from the bill, and we're only dealing with Section 1 and obviously Section 3.
We'll look forward to a committee substitute. Any questions for Representative Lindsay from any member of the committee? Seeing none, we're going to assign that to our Public Finance and Policy Subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right, House Bill 577.
House Bill 577 by Representative Smith of the 70th and others to amend Article 2, Chapter 7 of the Official Code annotated relating to imposition and computation of income taxes so as to provide for a tax credit for certain energy-efficient homes, to provide for short title, and to define terms and provide for procedures.
Chair recognizes Chairman Lynn Smith for a brief summary of her legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring to you today House Bill 577. This is a tax credit proposal for affordable energy-efficient homes. It would provide an incentive for home builders to build more energy-efficient homes. It applies to new homes of 2,000 square feet or less. The home builders would get a $2,000 tax credit per home if they exceed the state energy code by 20% and a $4,000 tax credit for homes exceeding the energy code by 40%. And to qualify for these credits, their home must meet the certain standards which are described in the bill.
Any questions for Representative Smith? I do want to caution you, Representative Smith, we have what's known as the 20-day rule as far as introducing
yes,
tax
sir, I understand
legislation. So even though I'm authorized to assign it to a subcommittee, unless I hear differently from Legislative Council, we may not be able to act on that this year. But,
thank you, Mr. Chair. It would get a hearing or consideration for next year. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
But
Thank you, sir.
And we will go ahead and assign it to the Income Tax Subcommittee, and we thank you for that presentation.
Thank you.
He's here. House Bill 561.
Moving them around. House Bill 561 by Representative Thomas of the 100th and others to amend Part 1, Article 2, Chapter 5, Title 48 of the Official Code relating to exemptions from ad valorem taxation so as to change provisions relating to homestead exemptions for disabled veterans.
Chair recognizes Representative Thomas to present a summary of his legislation. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 561 would make some changes to the homestead exemption for disabled veterans. Under current law, veterans who are disabled are only eligible for the homestead exemption if they're 100% disabled. What this bill would do is it would allow a proportionate amount of homestead exemption based on the proportion of the disability as defined by the Department of Veteran Affairs.
Are there any questions for the author of this legislation, members of the committee? If you might have heard what I said to Chairman Smith, that it's not likely that we'll do anything but assign it to a subcommittee at this point, and further action on this will probably be postponed by Constitution to next year. But we will go ahead, Representative Thomas, and assign that to our ad valorem subcommittee. We look forward to a spirited debate on this issue. We thank you for
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
House Representative Sims here. Okay, House Bill 594, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hang on
Members.
just a second.
Just a second.
House Bill 594 by Representative Sims of the 119th to amend Code Section 48.518 of the Official Code relating to time for making tax returns so as to provide that the governing authority of a county may, by ordinance, establish a time for making tax returns different from the time provided by the general law.
Chair recognizes representative from the Augusta area, as I remember. Please give us a brief overview of your legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Actually, the tax assessor's office in Augusta, Richmond County requested this change of date from April to March. History proves that personal property taxes are always returned about 10 days before the deadline, which creates quite a hardship for the tax assessor's office to present a tax digest on time. So the Population Act being no longer allowed under the state of Georgia Constitution, I've been asked to request the change from April to March, setting forth an extended time for the people to work, the staff to work, to enter and have sufficient time to audit those returns. Historically, Augusta, Richmond County is always late filing there. I'm sorry to say. I was on the commission, and I remember that we were always late, and perhaps this would help us to expedite our tax digest in a timely manner.
We certainly thank the lady for that presentation. Any questions? Members of the committee, seeing none, we're going to assign that Representative Sims to our ad valorem tax subcommittee, and we look forward to a spirited debate.
Thank you very much.
House Bill 593. Is Representative Hill here? Yes. Let him read, please, first. 593.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
House Bill 593 by Representative Hill and others to amend Title 48 relating to revenue and taxation so as to change provisions regarding bona fide conservation use property with respect to agritourism.
Chair recognizes Chairman Hill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 593 redefines agritourism and the entities that are engaged in agritourism. There is a question in many counties as of this new business, which is called agritourism, whether it's legitimate farming or not. I realize it's a 20-day rule, but if we also have House Bill 453 that is very similar in nature, has some slightly different definitions, which did get in under the 20-day rule and has already been assigned to subcommittee. I have not been yet called for a hearing, but if this could be heard in conjunction with 453, perhaps we can do a substitute and get this wording in under the other bill that did make it in that time.
Well, it's Chair's understanding that, will you yield for questions?
Yes, sir.
The Chair's understanding that there's been some recent precedent-setting cases in this area, and I think the first legislation, I believe Chairman Royal brought it, as I recall. It's right on this very point, a lot of them, so it might be a possibility of consolidating these two initiatives. But
yes, sir, and this does expand that a little bit. I've been working with the governor's office on this just to get this definition in.
We'll be looking at it with you with no promises, but I can tell you today we will assign it to the ad valorem tax subcommittee, and we'll be letting you know how much further it can get.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Let's see. House Resolution 374, please, Mr. Secretary. Yeah, I kind of curveballed you there.
That's right. House Resolution 374 by Representative Dixon and others proposing an amendment to the Constitution of Georgia as to provide that if non-residential property is annexed into a municipality, the ad valorem school taxes on that property will remain with the county school system unless otherwise provided by the General Assembly, or by local act, excuse me.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from the 6th, Representative Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This resolution would call for a constitutional amendment to make the change that he read, to allow for property tax where you have a county and an independent school system, and the city annexes property that is not residential and is not unimproved property. The school taxes would remain with the county. It also allows for the county school system and the independent school system to provide otherwise by mutual agreement.
It's any questions for the gentleman yield questions? Any questions from members of the committee? Chairman Martin.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If the gentleman yield for a question, I think I understand the intent, and I understand it will go before the voters for a referendum, but just to help me understand, I guess as a former mayor, I think you're trying to get at a school system that would just annex property for the revenue base. What if it's a combination? Would that, in other words, if 100 acres of it was non-residential and 10 acres were residential and it was all one annexation, is it your understanding that this section would apply, or would the 10-acre residential would go to this independent school system, but the 100 acres would not? Is that the way you?
If the 100 acres were just vacant land, it would go to the city school system also. The only thing, if they go out and annex a business or a factory that's already there and in operation, that would go to the county system.
I understand that. My question is, if the annexation was made up of two parts, a business and residential or vacant land, is it your understanding the way this is written that an annexation that did multiple types of property would be split accordingly?
By parcel.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you. I understand.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, we're going to assign this to our ad valorem tax subcommittee. Look forward to debate on this.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're going to fix that.
House Resolution 421. Please, Mr. Chairman, if you would read.
House Resolution 421 by Representative Holmes of the 61st, proposing an amendment to the Constitution so as to authorize the General Assembly by general law to provide for an increase in the state real estate transfer tax and the state tangible recording tax and for other purposes.
Chair recognizes Representative Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, as you know, one of the basic things that we in government are supposed to provide our citizens with, of course, are things like education, things like health and medical care, and housing is another one. And this bill deals with this issue of affordable housing, which, as you know, is a major problem confronting this state, and in particular in the urban areas where the cost of housing has grown tremendously. There have been a number of creative and innovative programs established in use of community development corporations and things like that as a way to try to build the stock of affordable housing. But one of the things that we have done has been losing the battle because we do not have a fund that in fact can be used to leverage additional funds from the private sector in order to build affordable housing. In Florida, as many of you know, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There is an excellent example of what in fact has been done, and one of the things they've done is to use these two particular taxes, the real estate transfer and state intangible recording tax, as a way of generating revenues. For example, the Department of Community Affairs has about $3 million now that we give them a year. That high was $7 million. It's down to $3 million. In Florida, they have a fund of $175 million that has been used to leverage over $1.5 billion in construction of housing. And so what this does is to sort of use Florida as a model to see how we can begin to address this particular problem that is a rural problem, and it is in fact an urban problem, Mr. Chairman. And this may not be the silver bullet, but I hope that we can at least begin to discuss and see if this isn't the way to do it, that we can do some other things to deal with this problem of adequate supplies of affordable housing.
Thank the gentleman. Will you yield for questions? Any questions for the author of the legislation? Seeing none, Representative Holmes, we're going to assign that to our public policy and public finance and policy subcommittee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
That presentation. Mr. Secretary, would you please read House Bill 634? Martin, you're happy to present from your place after he reads it.
House Bill 634 by Representative Martin of the 47th to amend Code Section 48-8-3 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to exemptions from sales and use taxation so as to change provisions related to the exemption of sales of food for off-premise consumption, to extend that exemption to include food and drink dispensed by and through vending machines and for other purposes.
Chair recognizes Chairman Martin to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Asked your consideration to assign this bill to subcommittee. I realize this, too, is one of the measures that was introduced after the 20th day, and we just wish to have the discussion and review the fiscal note this year for potential action next year. But what the bill seeks to do is find out what the number would be since when the sales tax exemption was passed on food some years ago. These purchases for food and drink from the vending machines were specifically left out. We'd just like to know what the effect of that would be, and if it would be possible to relieve from Georgians that tax burden. Ask your consideration to assign that to a subcommittee.
Any questions for the author? Seeing none, we're going to assign that to our sales tax subcommittee, and I think our final first reading. I'm going to ask you to do double duty, Chairman Lewis, if you would read House Bill 607, and then if you would immediately begin to explain it.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, House Bill 607 by Representative Lewis of the 15th to amend Article 3, Chapter 13, Title 48, Official Code of Georgia annotated related excise tax on the furnishing for value to the public of any rooms, lodging, or accommodations, so as to change certain provisions regarding the levy and collection of such tax and for other purposes.
You're recognized to explain the bill.
I'll try to do this in about 20 seconds, Mr. Chairman. What my understanding of what this does is it creates special districts within certain jurisdictions that change the way they levy and collect certain excise taxes, and I certainly look forward to those proponents of this to providing more detail in subcommittee as that process may get started.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are there questions for the author of this legislation? Seeing none, we're going to assign that to our Public Finance and Policy Subcommittee. That concludes our, well, actually, I exercise the prerogative of the chair, and I would like to assign House Bill 585 to our Tax Reform Subcommittee. And now we're on second readers. We're trying to skip around on our agenda to accommodate members that have other obligations in other committees, and we will do so to the extent that that doesn't impair the quality of analysis that we put into each of these pieces of legislation. But we will try to help everybody. It's got to be in at least three places at one time. So I'm going to call on our ad valorem subcommittee chairman, either Chairman Royal or Sims. Do you have a report to the full committee on House Bill 328, please, sir? What number are you?
Mr. Chairman, the ad valorem tax subcommittee met on House Bill 328 and had a do pass recommendation.
Chair recognizes Representative Roger Bruce, please, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Again, this bill is simply to allow the new cities that have been created over the last couple of sessions to extend the Freeport benefits to these new cities. And basically what that does, it allows these new cities to decide for themselves whether or not they want to let certain businesses to have an exemption on the ad valorem tax for certain inventories that they may have at the end of the year. That's it. It's a bill strictly to allow the cities to decide.
Questions for the author of this legislation from members of the committee? Give you each a moment or two to look at this. Chair recognizes Representative Martin.
Gentleman yield. I believe this was brought to you by the local governments down there, and they asked you for the support on this.
That's correct.
To do this for them.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? 11, who's that? Chairman Jones.
Will the representative yield?
Yes, ma'am.
My understanding of this bill, which I signed, is that there are several businesses down in, for example, in South Fulton, this would pertain to very few areas, just where there's been a new city, currently have this exemption.
That's
but
correct.
by being, so there's no additional tax effect. By now, if they should go into the new city, it would simply extend it so that they would have the right to continue that.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Further inquiry? All right, what's the pleasure of the committee?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? House Bill 328, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign.
Thank you,
Passes. Thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you very much.
Now, who did I promise that? Who's in the biggest hurry right now? Who's got somewhere else to be right now, really? That's great. Our Public Policy and Subcommittee Chair, Chairman Scott, do you have a report on House Bill 327? What number? I'm sorry. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It's on.
Are we there?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. The Public Finance Policy Subcommittee recommends full committee do pass on House Bill number 327.
Chair recognizes Representative Mark Williams to present his bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Currently in the state of Georgia, there are 180 public housing authorities operating, serving 250,000 of our citizens. There are public housing authorities in every county, and they employ 3,000 Georgians. In addition to employment, public housing authorities contribute over $500 million a year to Georgia's economy. The average rent of a public housing authority resident in the state of Georgia is $220 a month. Currently, there is approximately $16.6 million in outstanding bad debt in the state. What this bill does is simply add housing authorities to the list of claimants on income tax returns for delinquent renters. We ask taxpayers, and we make laws to ask taxpayers to subsidize rent, and I feel that we should do everything in our power as lawmakers to be good stewards of that money and make folks in this state live up to their obligations. That's the crux of the bill, Mr. Chairman, and I'll yield for any questions.
Give the committee a moment to look at this legislation. And I have a question. Who is the beneficiary of the thrust of this legislation? Is it a public enterprise or a private enterprise?
Quasi-public. It's owned by the housing authority but funded by the federal government.
And the housing authority is governmental or not governmental?
It's governmental.
So what's not public about that? The federal government, I think, is governmental. So what's not public?
Well, it's a separate authority set up in each city or government entity that governs itself, and all the rent and all the funding comes from the federal government. But they're set up as a semi-private authority.
Follow-up question. Have you made provision in your bill to compensate the Revenue Department for the administrative expenses, if any, antecedent to this?
Mr. Chairman, we've added a $25 administrative fee, and based on the current delinquency rate in the state of Georgia at 500 of those per year, would come to approximately $2 million to offset their cost. That's $25 per occurrence.
Any other questions for the author of this legislation? Seeing none, what's the pleasure of the committee?
Move to pass by committee substitute.
I have a motion do pass by committee substitute and a second. Is there any further discussion on House Bill 327? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you very much.
All right. We got anybody else that's under significant time restraints? All right. Chairman Knox's bill is where? Chairman Jones, do you have a report to the full committee on House Bill 242, please, ma'am? I know I slipped up on you, so take your time. It's on the way to you, by the way. Behind you.
The Income Tax Subcommittee passed out House Bill 242 unanimously on the 22nd.
Thanks. Is that right?
Yes.
Thanks, Chairman Jones. Chair recognizes Chairman of the Insurance Committee. Representative Knox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. The bill I'm brought before you today and that's passed out of the Income Tax Subcommittee is a bill affecting health savings account products in Georgia. What it does is forbear or forgive taxes in two new areas that has not been involved in the health savings account plans in Georgia before. One of them being an income tax forbearance for the person paying the premium on the catastrophic portion of the product, and the other one being a forgiveness or forbearance of the 2.25% premium tax paid by insurers on the premiums of the catastrophic health insurance portion of the product. I'll just briefly, if you want me to explain what it is in case anybody doesn't know what a health savings account product is.
Please.
All right. Health savings account is to provide, of course, health resources for individuals and small businesses primarily. And what it does is it allows the individual or the small business to set aside pre-tax dollars to take care of certain health care expenses. And then there's a deductible after. If you exhaust that amount, you set aside a certain amount each month depending on what you think your health care needs will be. And then you have a deductible after you exhaust those amounts in payment of your health care needs. And following that, you have what we more think of typically as a health insurance plan. It's a catastrophic plan, sometimes called catastrophic plan, to pay for large expenses and emergency health care type expenses. And that's the portion of the product that we're speaking about in this bill. These products are already sold in Georgia. There's nothing new about the product itself, and actually there's nothing new about this concept. It's just, I suppose, it hasn't been brought before us before. But the purpose of it is to encourage the use and sale of these products in Georgia in order to encourage people to have their own health care and take care of their own health care, be independent. And we think that this will happen if we can get the cost of the product itself down for the individual. Most corporations are able to deduct their the taxes from their taxes, the premiums they pay on that portion of the product. And the second part is the premium tax forgiveness on the premium tax of 2.25% for the companies that sell the product. The reason for doing that is to encourage companies and to incentivize companies to market the products more vigorously and to make them more widely available. And we think that if they do that, there'll be more folks who will have insurance and they'll have it at a lesser cost. Right now, I said the product's in the marketplace. Although it's been around for a good while, it's enabled by federal legislation and state legislation as well. It's not as widely accepted as we would like to see it be accepted for the purposes of persons having the ability to provide their own health care. That's basically it. Mr. Chairman, if there are any questions, I'll try to answer the best I can.
I'd appreciate it if you would cover the fiscal impact on the budget.
We have a fiscal note. I don't know if at one time everyone had a copy of it in their
we do
in their folder, and I'm just going to read what you have there. Best I can tell is, on average, the premium cost that the fiscal note tells us is about $3,800 per year, and based on the number of plans that are assumed by the folks who did the fiscal note, that yields about $232.6 million in premiums in Georgia. When you look down at Table 1, it shows the decrease in the state premium tax revenues, which is I assume that y'all would be the most interested in. And I believe that this number also includes taxes that are already that are already affected by policies that are currently in force, includes that number in this as well. And then the decrease in the state income taxes at 2008 is 473.2
thousands, I believe.
Yeah, 473,000, whatever that is, 0.2. In 2008, going up to 1,779,000 in 2013. That would be the loss in state income tax. Likewise, with the decrease in the premium tax revenues, it goes from $3.460 million to $13 million in premium taxes as of 2013.
Gentlemen, yield for questions. Other questions?
I'll do the best I can. Yes,
Chair
sir.
recognizes Representative Abrams.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Chairman Knox, I'm very supportive of the plan, the component of the plan that helps consumers, incentivizes consumers to take more responsibility for their health care. My concern here is that this appears to incentivize insurers for lowering their risk. My point particularly is that the higher your deductible, the lower the risk for the insurer of you using that insurance product. Therefore, if you need to take preventative measures, if you should go and get your colonoscopy earlier, because you have such a high deductible, you are going to be disincentivized from taking advantage of that and therefore lower the risk on the insurer of having to provide health care services to you. My concern is that the fiscal impact of incentivizing high deductible plans in the state of Georgia takes about $15 million out of our coffers over the next 5 to 7 years and has the added effect of shifting the burden onto our healthcare system, essentially emergency rooms, who have to take care of those persons who are unwilling to use their high deductible plan because of the essential risk. The other component piece for this that disturbs me is the fact that this also incentivizes employers to lower, or to you basically start pushing out lower deductible plans from the marketplace, so that you provide an economic benefit for higher deductible plans to come into the marketplace, but you remove the incentive for lower deductible plans. Can you talk to me a little bit about why it's important for us to essentially incentivize people who are going to lower their risk and therefore push more risk and more burden onto consumers?
Well, first, and I'm not sure I can answer all your questions, because that's a very good question. It's detailed. But let me say this. My understanding of how this could work, and I've some years of experience in the insurance business, would be that companies typically can set with the individual, you can purchase the amount of deductible that you want. So I would expect that, number one, by incentivizing the premium, you'll have more companies in the marketplace selling this product, because it's not a high-profit product. It has to compete with government plans and other commercial plans where, 100% of the bolt's paid, and there's a lot more room for profit in that product. So these are not high-profit products at all, which is one of the reasons why I think we need to try to incentivize the sale of the product, so that there'll be some reason for them to go out and try to market it. Because, if they've got it in their drawer in the office and somebody wants to come in and buy it, that's one thing, but we want them to go out and try to sell it. That's how people get products and things. So I'm not sure that it would necessarily, that incentivizing the premium tax would necessarily result in people purchasing only higher deductible plans. I think that would be up to the individual purchaser to a large extent, and part of the expense I think that you're concerned about might be offset by the fact that there's a cumulative effect with respect to the pre-tax dollars that you can set aside. These kind of plans are not, you don't lose the money, it stays there, you can use it, and so if you don't have any expenses on the pre-tax dollars during the course of a year, those can be used for, as you mentioned, if you have to go to the emergency room or something like that. And that depends to a great extent on how much you put into that plan each month in pre-tax dollars, and to a large extent that depends on what your economic status is, and what you can afford to put in them, and what you otherwise want to do with your money. So I think there are too many variables in this to be able to just make a blanket statement that this is going to drive up the cost of insurance or it's going to drive out consumers. If I thought that was the case, I wouldn't be here, because I'm not interested in doing that. I'm trying to help solve a problem, and that is the high cost of health care at the current time, and actually the lack of availability. I have another bill totally different than this to try to help folks who can't get insurance, who are uninsurable or uninsured at the present time. It doesn't have anything to do with this, although this could be used for that. For some people who are uninsured, not through any fault of their own, and actually have some money they could buy, they just can't get any insurance anywhere. So this might even serve to solve some of those problems. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Chairman Martin.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you. The gentleman answered my question. I believe this would make the product, you feel like it would make the product more available, because typically insurance is sold on a commission basis for how much the premium is. Is that not correct?
That's correct.
And typically higher deductible policies, higher out-of-pocket policies have a lower premium, and therefore agents aren't always incentivized to offer that product. And I think while it may be a minimal part of this, I see an important part is this may actually bring some people that may now be able to purchase and be covered by a high deductible plan that aren't covered today. I see that as an added benefit. I know you see that as sort of an ancillary benefit to the reason you brought the plan, but I see that as a positive benefit as well, and I just wanted to make sure I understood that would also be an advantage.
I'd agree with that. That's absolutely correct. Thank you for that.
Chair recognizes Representative Graves.
I waive. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, I see it as an opportunity to afford insurance to maybe some folks that might otherwise always be uninsured. First dollar coverage is most definitely the most expensive of all coverage, and it just adds another alternative. We certainly have in my opinion, almost a catastrophic situation of a rising group of uninsured working poor, and this will give one more arrow in the quiver, I think, and I certainly laud the gentleman for bringing it. Any other questions? Seeing none, what's the pleasure of the committee? I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Bill carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
All right. House Bill Sales Tax Subcommittee. Chairman Lewis, do you have a report on House Bill 87?
Your Sales Tax Subcommittee met on House Bill 87, LC number 186177S, and we gave it a due pass recommendation by committee substitute.
Chair recognizes the Vice Chairman of this committee, Representative Sims, to present House Bill 87.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a simple bill. In the past, a lot of our commodities, as far as the sale of certain machinery for those commodities, has been exempted for sales tax in the dealing of the production of those crops. They did not include, though, for some reason, peaches, blackberries, and blueberries. And all we're asking in this bill is to add those commodities to the exemption for the equipment that used in production. It's only the motorized equipment that is used. It's not the plows and the implements that go along with it, just the motorized equipment.
I'm glad you brought this. I didn't think there was anything that even dreamed of growing that wasn't exempt from the tax structure. So far we have. You really found the very last things. I mean,
well, maybe hogs and cows. I don't know why you'd need them for that, but maybe we'll get them next year.
Chairman Rice, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a serious question for Mr. Sims. I use computers in my business, and they are absolutely essential. Do you think that you would accept an amendment for computers and the tax on computers?
On computers, I don't think that it would be germane to this bill. It's hard to plow with a computer.
We'll see. Thanks an awful lot.
24, who's that? Chairman Mills?
On the audit report, the last line of the audit report, it reads that there'll be a loss in local revenues. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, I'll try to speak to that just a little bit. Actually, the people that are growing these commodities now probably have row crops, and that this equipment is being dually used. It's just for the folks that are actually only having maybe have a peach orchard or a blueberry orchard or a blackberry row crop. Actually, blackberries are a row crop. They're a new commodity that's come on board as far as farming has been adjusted. There's very little of this tax that's actually being collected now, if at all any. This was just an estimate used for future production at that point in time, as far as estimates were concerned. That's the way I dealt with the fiscal note when it came back, because from what I've been told by most of the folks in revenue, that it would be very, very hard to determine whether or not the production of some of these items was just for the peaches, blackberries, or blueberries, or if they could actually use it for a row crop like corn, peanuts, or soybeans, or something like that in the same area. Also, if they had a pecan grove, they could say the same thing for the pecan grove, which is already exempted.
Did that come anywhere near answering that question?
Well, I found out a lot about blackberries. I don't know if I found out a lot about 110,000 loss in local revenues, but my main question is when you start talking about loss in local revenues, I just want to make sure that, well, that's an important question that we need to talk about, and that's why I brought it up.
As a shift, the production of the land also goes up, which makes an ad valorem issue as far as the assessment of that property later on, too. So, there's a shift there back the other way also. There may be agritourism. Now I'm looking at my good friend down that other side down there. Because if they were, I was trying to make a stretch. I'll be honest with you. He's got it covered over there with that conservation use. So.
That may be one of the worst justifications I've ever heard given.
Well, you like to pick your own, don't you?
Any other questions for the author of this most important legislation? Seeing none, what's the pleasure of the committee? I have a motion. I have a second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion is due pass by committee substitute. All in favor of that motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Blueberries are safe forever.
Thank you.
Let's see, we don't have Chairman Parsons, or do we have Austin? Yeah, Chairman Scott, would you have a report to the full committee on House Bill 451? And what number are you? 26?
26. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee.
Your pleasure. Whichever you.
My microphone might not be.
It's 26. I've got you on, but I don't.
Microphone might not be working.
Did you press the button up there? Try 25. Can you pass that one over to you?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, the Public Finance and Policy Subcommittee of Ways and Means recommends due pass on House Bill 451 to the full Committee of Ways and Means.
Okay. I'm going to recognize Chairman Lewis in just 1 second, but you're being handed hot off the press a committee substitute as we speak. So, thank you. Everybody have LC 186283S. Is there anyone that doesn't have that version? Chair recognizes Chairman Lewis to present House Bill 451. Very exciting proposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 451 by committee substitute is before you today. Just real quickly, there were some technical changes, as I understand it, made to this bill as it passed through subcommittee to make it a little more palatable with respect to the Department of Revenue and our local government representatives there. They really didn't change the scope and breadth of the legislation, but did take care of some technicalities should questions arise when it came to locating a facility such as this. But, Mr. Chairman, last year there were 3 study committees that were born out of Ways and Means. One of those study committees was the Business Incentive Study Committee, where we looked, we had 4 meetings around the state, and we looked at a number of business incentives that would spawn new economic development in the state of Georgia, as well as help retain the economy, parts of the economy we already had. From that, we picked up 6 to 8 really good policy ideas, I believe, and this is the result of one of those 6 to 8 really good ideas that came forward. This meeting occurred in Savannah, where the topic was tourism, economic development, and this bill before you is modeled after the Kentucky tourism bill. We're calling it the Georgia Tourism Development Act, and I'm going to just briefly go through what it does and then, of course, try to answer some questions. The purpose of this is to attract large destination resorts that would not otherwise consider Georgia. They must provide a capital investment, a minimum of $25 million, and 50% of the guests being residents of states outside of Georgia. Arguably, tourism is the best type of economic development, and with the 15 million or so people who travel through Georgia each year on their way to Florida, this could be an incentive to persuade them to spend a few extra days and a whole lot of money here in Georgia. There are adequate protections that are provided in this legislation so that local governments must approve the project before it can move forward, and also the Georgia Department of Economic Development and Tourism must approve the project. So it has to meet two tests, one by the department and one by the local jurisdiction from where it will reside. One technical change that we made in the legislation, we changed the language to ensure that if a project that's being considered as wholly in a municipality, that municipality would be the one to make that decision, and if it's wholly contained in an unincorporated area, that county would make that decision. The language was a little ambiguous, that it may take both governing authorities to make that decision, and we didn't want to cross that issue, thought there might be problems. So on the advice of council and the local governments, we tried to change that language, and I think we satisfactorily did. This would provide a sales tax refund for an approved company from sales tax collected at the resort, which could be room rentals, food and beverage, entertainment activity, ticket purchases, and so on. The approved company may apply to the Department of Revenue for a sales tax refund equal to 2.5% of the original capital investment over a 10-year term. So for an example, if an approved company spends $100 million on a destination resort located here in Georgia, the company would be entitled to apply for a $2.5 million refund each year for 10 years, or a total recycled investment of $25 million. However, this is leading to. It will not exceed 25% of the approved capital cost that they spend. In Kentucky, since enacting their tourism development statute, which became effective in 2001, they've enjoyed a total of $600 million of new qualified investment in 12 different resorts. That has created a positive economic impact of nearly $6 billion for that state. Unlike other programs that require funding from the state budget, this program will not cost the state any loss in revenue, since these destination resorts would not otherwise have located in Georgia, perhaps. There would be a positive fiscal impact in the state of Georgia with increased payroll taxes, the balance of sales taxes, state corporate income taxes, and the overall positive ripple effect of the economy. Right now, Mr. Chairman, there's a publicly traded company looking to locate a $100 million destination resort that will create approximately 500 new jobs. And it will locate in Georgia rather than the other three states they're currently looking at, which are both Carolinas and Florida. Company officials, and I have a letter from them, that have indicated they will come to Georgia if this bill is passed and signed into law. And incidentally, Mr. Chairman, I've received letters from other large attraction-type developers, and if you add up the amount of money that these letters say these companies will spend, it's approaching $1 billion already, subject to this bill passing. And the single largest investment that I've received communication of right now is a $400 million development off of Georgia 400 in Dawson County. The one I just spoke of is about $100 to $150 million destination resort on Lake Lanier in Forsyth County. Other resorts that have expressed interest in Georgia: Busch Gardens, Universal Studios, Grand Ole Opry, and the 150th Anniversary Civil War Museum. And there's also a provision in here that would allow for existing attractions here in Georgia to take advantage of this also. If an existing attraction such as, I think, Wild Adventures down near Valdosta, who's looking to expand about a $40 million capital investment in their attraction, if that expansion is approved by the department and the local government down there, they would be able to take advantage of this also, thereby incentivizing that expansion in the Valdosta area of Georgia. It could also include places such as the Sea Island, the Cloister at Sea Island, Reynolds Plantation, Callaway Gardens, Stone Mountain, the Lake Lanier Islands Authority, and Barnsley Gardens. So, Mr. Chairman, that's just a real quick explanation. I'll be happy to try and answer any questions, but I do want to emphasize just how wonderful this could be for Georgia and how there is no, that as far as I can tell, there is no negative impact at all in this legislation. This is probably one of the few that we have that doesn't take an immediate negative bite out of any airport, but it only could lead to just enormous potential economic benefit.
As I understood it, the developer spends all the money, pays all the taxes.
That's right.
On the expenditures for the improvements, everything, and then seeks a refund retroactively over the next 10 years.
That is right, up to 10 years, or 25%, or once 25% is recouped, whichever comes first.
The local government will wind up with a tremendously increased value for ad valorem tax purposes on property.
That's right.
Lots of hotel motel tax will be injected into the local governments, almost as a windfall.
Yes, sir.
For that, there might be some infrastructural investment they might have to make, but very little probably.
Well, from what I understand, some of the localities that are looking at this already are more than willing to make that infrastructure investment because it's literally pennies on the dollar from what they could benefit.
Very exciting. Gentlemen, you have a question from the chairman of the caucus?
I'll certainly try.
Representative Roberts, you were...
Friendly question.
Good.
Just got one question, and I guess it's based off the surveys or whatever. The part about would they have to attract at least 50% of the visitors outside of the state of Georgia. Is that what they're basing that off of?
Basing it off what, Florida? Is that what you do?
Other attractions?
Yes.
Surveys or whatever?
According to the department, I think we heard in subcommittee testified that in the aggregate, when you look at these attractions around the state, somewhere around 60 to 65% of the folks that visit those are from out of state right now. But a new developer would have to show some type of proof, if you will, that they can attract up to 50% from outside the state.
Yeah, we heard testimony. We're well over that now with what we have in the state, and these would be certainly at the higher echelon drawing power. When you start at $25 million, that's a pretty substantial investment. Other questions? Any discussion? Representative Rice? Yeah.
I must have missed it. I'm sure you said it. On existing facilities, they're grandfathered in at what rate, I assume?
Well, they're not necessarily grandfathered, as I understand it. What happens on an existing facility, such as Six Flags or Wild Adventures, if they do an expansion, not a renovation of existing features or attractions, but if they do an expansion to add new attractions, and it exceeds $25 million, they would qualify to apply for this status if approved by the department and the locality that they're in. But it would only go toward those new dollars that are being spent for new expansion.
We understood there'd be a baseline established, and then the tax generated over above the baseline that's obviously then attributable to new investment would be subject to the refund application. Good question that was asked in subcommittee. Other questions? We've got our chairman of economic development over there. I can't imagine that you don't want to have something to say about this before we vote on it.
Probably the biggest bill that we've had, pro-tourism bill that we've had in the history of the state, and the potential opportunity for local government revenue, whether it's lost, education lost, phenomenal amounts of hidden revenue that's there. And just for us extending a fig leaf to these people to come in. So yeah, I'm ready to move.
Chair recognizes our chairman of economic development, Representative Stevens, for a motion.
I move to pass.
Second.
I have a motion do pass by committee sub. Second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. We'll send this across the hall. After it goes through rules, I hope. Okay. Sales tax subcommittee. Who's that? We have Chairman Lewis. Do you have a report on House Bill 264, please? which was recommitted to Ways and Means from the floor today, I believe.
I'm sure I do, Mr. Chairman, and I'm sure the report will show that the House Bill 264 passed out of subcommittee with a due pass recommendation by committee substitute, if I remember correctly.
Chair recognizes Representative Millar, the author of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's always a pleasure to come back to this committee, and I appreciate your indulgence. It was strongly suggested to me about 8:45 this morning that I recommit this bill to Ways and Means at the Rules Committee level, and the reason being that they wanted us to add a section in here that basically, as you know, we've had some lawsuits going on between DeKalb County and several cities for the last 7 years. And the language that we've added in here on page 5, starting on line 16, is if for any reason the intergovernmental agreements for these existing cities become null and void, then they will then be subject to the terms of this agreement, just like Dunwoody or any other city. And that's the change in the bill. And that way, I don't know, maybe it'll help them settle a lawsuit, but at least at the end of the day, everybody will be treated equally. And that was the intent, I think.
Now, what's before the committee, as I understand it, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, is LC 186280S, which is a committee sub.
Yes, sir.
Being submitted now by you as the author
Yes,
for
sir.
reconsideration of the full committee.
Right.
And it is the way you want it now. You want us to vote on it as it is
It's the way it was
presented.
suggested it should be, and I figure that's the way I want it. Yes, sir. Sort of like when your wife was sitting out there in the audience to see what a good job you do running this committee. So I just do what I'm told.
I was curious as to what you might have meant by that. It's getting more and more obvious to me every minute you don't care about getting this passed. Are there any questions for the author of this legislation? I'll go on. Anybody have any questions? This bill was deliberated long and hard. Obviously, Dunwoody's not a city yet. If it were to become a city and an action that's going on in the city, this would apply. If it doesn't, this entire bill becomes null and void by its own terms. Any questions? What's the pleasure of the committee? I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign. Bill passes, and we'll send it back to rules.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I promise I won't be back again for the balance of the session.
We really appreciate you being with us. Okay, is there anybody else here that's on a... We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 other propositions before the committee. Anybody of any urgency? Representative Will? Okay. Yeah, well, do we have anybody from what subcommittee that come out of? Sales tax. Chuck, Chairman Martin, you got to report to the full committee. House Bill 140.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Lewis chaired this meeting, but House Bill 140, LC 186028, was moved on to full committee with a due pass recommendation from your sales tax subcommittee.
I recognize as the chairman of the judiciary. Non-civil? That's what it is. Civil. Civil.
We're very civil.
Very civil. Representative Willard, please present your
Mr.
bill.
Chairman. We are before you today with a proposal, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. This grew out of some discussions I've had and thinking I've had over the last couple of years. I've mentioned this in the committee meetings before, but I was honored to serve on a committee with Chairman Royal. This was back in 02, 01, that area. We had a lot of problems going on with the cities and counties trying to work out their new agreements as to the manner in which their local option sales tax funds will be divided based upon the then occurring census. And it caused such a consternation and problems between those local governments. Some of them to this day still have problems in their locality because of what they went through. So I know in talking to Chairman Royal, we said we got to find some way to get this thing resolved before it comes around again. And so we did some thinking, and we came up with, I think, a unique approach that has been reviewed and blessed by both Georgia Municipal Association as well as the County Commissioners of Georgia's Association, ACCG. And I'll describe to you what we're doing, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. The changes that we're making, I call it a statutory type litigation, although it's really more of a review and hearing by the court, in which the court will have placed before it proposals. A proposal that comes from the county.
Okay.
Let me back up first, say the county and the cities will still go through the normal attempts to resolve by negotiation their agreement. If they can't do it by negotiation, there's a requirement they go through mediation. If they go through mediation, still can't reach an agreement, this is the final step. This is where they will now say, okay, we can't reach an agreement, so the cities, perhaps on one side of the table, the county on the other side of the table, or it could be a county and a city or other cities joining with it, would then prepare what will be what they call their best proposal to submit to the court. One of them can file a petition, and then these proposals will be reviewed by the court. There will be a hearing before court. The judge who will be hearing these will be a visiting judge, not one of the circuit that may be, as I say, tainted, but at least feel in an awkward position by virtue of the fact it may be paid by the county something or lives in that area. But what you'd have is the court where the matter is pending as far as the circuit would appoint a judge from another area to come in and hear this case. It could be a senior judge. It could be a judge just invited by this provision in the law to come in and make the hearing, and the parties would come in with these two proposals. And the thing they're trying to do is recognize the fairness of their proposal and convince the court which one has the best, fairest proposal based upon, I think it's 11 criteria we have under the law that are to be guiding principles in reaching these intergovernmental agreements for the division of the local option sales tax. After the hearing, the court will then accept one of those agreements, and in doing so, the court will be entering an order. It says the judge shall enter a final order containing a new distribution certificate and transmit a copy of it to the commission. That's the Commissioner of Community Affairs. An appeal shall be by application, and the decision of the judge shall be disturbed only for the judge's disregard of the law, for partiality of the judge, or for corruption, fraud, etc. So we're saying this should be the finality of it. And the nice thing about this, I call it baseball arbitration. I use the term because that's really what happens in baseball when you have a team trying to resolve with one of its players a salary dispute, and they cannot reach the agreement. What they finally do is they wind up going to an arbitrator, and each side submits their proposal, and the arbitrator doesn't split the baby. It can only accept one or the other. And so we're effectively doing the same thing here. I submit to the panel that what will really come out of this is it's going to really mandate the parties recognize the fairness and reach appropriate agreements rather than taking the risk of finally having it go to this third party to make the decision for them, just as it happens in the baseball approach. The other good thing about it is it continues the tax. There is no drop-dead date as far as that. The court, there are dates for which things will happen, but under the old law, we said if you don't reach agreement, the tax stops, it goes away, and that causes a great penalty to the local governments. It also, if you go over to the Section 3, ladies and gentlemen, we've changed another provision here that dealt with that very issue. That is, under the old law, the county could say, well, we're dissatisfied. We don't want to carry on with the local option sales tax. We're going to stop that, and we're going to go to perhaps the host tax, which all the funds go to the county. And so this is another hammer, you might say, used. We saw in the negotiations, and what we're doing here is we're changing it so that now it requires not only the county, but at least municipalities containing more than one half of the aggregate population of all the qualified municipalities to say, well, we'll join together as a means of putting it on referendum before the voters if there's going to be a stopping of that tax. So there can't be just one unilateral decision about taking this matter and removing the tax. That, in a nutshell, defines what we're trying to do, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be glad to accept any questions.
Gosh, if that was a nutshell, I'd hate to.
From a lawyer, that's a nutshell.
I'd hate to hear a thorough explanation if that was just a nutshell. You obviously get paid by the hour, wouldn't you? So, just kidding.
No contingency.
This is very important and very serious legislation. It does solve what a lot of folks thought heretofore was an unsolvable problem, and I certainly commend and laud the gentleman for bringing this. I know it comes at the end of a lot of research and a lot of study, and for that we're grateful. Are there any questions? I have 211. Who's that? Chairman Jones?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I had a question. My understanding of the bill is that it would remove the ability, for example, if the county, particularly in the case where, for example, in Fulton County, where the entire county is municipalized, there's less incentive for the county to continue the lost tax. The 13 cities rely on it. What I'm also curious about, though, is formerly represented Forsyth County, and we had the opposite problem, in which there was one city with less than 3% of the county's population. But when it came time to renegotiate loss, the city would insist on 15% of the loss distribution, because without the city's participation there was no loss, but all the growth was in the county. Does this address that as well?
I believe it does very well, Representative Jones. The reason is, if they're going to be arguing for that 15%, they've got to go through those standards that are set out in the law and show why and how that is justified, not to the county as the opposite party, but to this third party, the court.
We yield for another question.
Yes, ma'am.
So what I could see happening in Fulton, just the opposite of, or same situation with Forsyth, but the city and county parties would shift depending on the percentages, is it would take away the ability or the incentive as much to extort, I guess you could say, the other entities. And I could see it happening equally throughout the state, depending on whichever entity had the smallest to gain from it.
That's right. And you say right, in Fulton County, we're getting smaller and smaller as far as the percentage going to the county under the legislation that was passed as general legislation 2 years ago with the starting of the incorporation of cities. There will be no real incentive for the county to say, well, I don't need any more, just do away with it. So we're putting that question where all parties, at least a half of the population of the cities, have to also agree to that.
So final comment, though, it's really not a Fulton-only issue. It's one throughout the state.
Absolutely not. That's right. It is just like you say, from Forsyth County to down in maybe Bullock or other counties that have them.
Chairman Stevens?
Representative Willow, isn't this one of those rare cases this year where GMA and ACCG agree?
I don't know how rare it is, but I was privileged to bring them together, and they looked it over. We talked about it and worked on it, and they said this is something they can work with and have as a part of their proposals.
Good. They're actually sitting together.
Wave your hand there. Aren't they a lovely couple?
Chairman Rice waves 14.
Mr. Chairman, are you ready for a motion?
Yes, sir, if you're ready to make one.
Yes, sir. I move due pass on House Bill 140.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign.
I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
189, Martin and Lewis. Either one of them. Royal or Sims. Here we go. Chairman Royal, do you have a report to the full committee on House Bill 289?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. The Ad valorem tax subcommittee met this morning and has a due pass recommendation on House Bill 289.
The chair recognizes the chairman of the majority caucus, Representative Roberts. Present the bill. From your place will be fine. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I bring before you today House Bill 289. What this bill is a tax exemption for railroad equipment companies for labor, materials, and overhead to maintain, repair, or improve a railroad equipment company's railroad car. This bill does not apply to railroad companies. It applies to the companies that refurbish the railroad cars. And what this seeks to do is to give them an ad valorem sales tax exemption. There are currently 13 facilities in the state of Georgia. And we have, in talks with other companies, we were one of the last states that does not have this exemption there. They're looking at investing approximately $70 million in the state of Georgia to come in to expand these facilities. Now, Chairman Mills, I know you had a question a while ago about the local impact on local government. If we look at the fiscal note, the impact to the state is $15,800. The impact to local governments is $864,000. And I know that looks high. I talked to the chairman of my county commission in which two of these facilities are located. I talked to him about this piece of legislation. He said that according to what he perceives going to take place with the expansion of the facility, the expansion of jobs and all there, that he would rather see that come in because he thinks at the end of the day there may be a net gain to the community with the loss of this revenue to the local government. Mr. Chairman, that's basically a synopsis of the bill. I'm glad to answer any questions. Anybody might have.
The gentleman is yielded for questions. Members of the committee have questions for the author of this legislation. Could you please cover for me the fiscal note?
Yes. According to the fiscal note that we have and the way it was put together, if you look at it, in 2004, the railroad company paid about $6.4 million in ad valorem taxes to the Georgia fair market value of the railroad cars. On that amount, there was approximately $64,000 that was retained by the state administration fee, and approximately $52,400 was property tax revenue based on the state's quarter of the mill, and the remaining was distributed to the local government. The fair market value of railroad cars equaled about $541 million there to it. And if it takes and shows the ratios used by the county, they went from 33.5% to 40% was the high range, and looked at 33.5% for a lower range. 96 counties out of 159 accesses at a 40% value of that. So they basically took the happy medium and went to 38%. And based off of that, before they come up with the $15,800 to the state. And to be honest with you, Mr. Chairman, I actually figured it was going to be higher than what the fiscal note come back. I'll be honest with you, I was surprised.
Well, are you comfortable with, I guess, what some may characterize as almost $1 million unfunded mandate imposed upon the local governments? I mean,
based on talking with my chairman of the county commission and what he saw the benefit of the expansion there and the added jobs and all to the local community, especially in rural Georgia. And I can give you the 13 facilities. One of them is located in Gray, another one's in Gordon, one's in McIntyre, Kennel, Valdosta, Augusta, Fairburn. There's 2 in Waycross, and there's 2 in Fitzgerald, and there's actually 2 in Atlanta. And when they looked at, or I won't say all of my county commissioners that I talked to, when he looked at the expansion of the jobs that it could create here in the rural part of the state, he was very happy with what he saw. He saw that at the end of the day, he felt like it was going to be more than neutral with the revenue he lost by adding more jobs and higher paid jobs there in the community.
And of course, my understanding, your proposition will be subject to a vote of the people as well.
Yes, yes, this will be takes 2/3 vote on the floor as well.
Any other questions for the author of this legislation? I don't see any lights lighting up. What's the pleasure of the committee? I have a motion. I have more than 1 second. Any further discussion? Train's leaving the station here. Any more discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Like sign. We have one nay. Motion carries. We'll report it to rules. Thank you, Representative Roberts. Okay. Chairman Royal, do you have a report to the full committee on House Bill 351?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Ad valorem tax subcommittee met this morning and made a do pass recommendation on House Bill 351.
Chair recognizes Chairman of Economic Development, Chairman Stevens. Present the bill, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill came out of subcommittee, of course. It's a bill that creates the Georgia Arts Trust. It uses the title for the Georgia Council for the Arts for the specific purpose of using income taxes as an income tax credit to leverage the dollars for the arts. And the specific dollars for the income tax credit is $5,000 for an individual, $10,000 for a corporation to go into this trust. And as I mentioned earlier this morning in subcommittee, this is an item that is funded in the governor's budget as well, to the tune of $250,000 as seed money to get this arts trust off the ground.
Gentlemen, yield for a question?
Certainly.
Chairman Parsons.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to remind the gentleman that this is in the governor's recommendation, that budget is not the governor's budget, it's the people's budget.
My apologies. You're exactly right, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions? I know this bill's had a lot of debate. It's had a lot of study. Chairman Wright.
Chairman Stevens, I served on the Arts Study Committee this past summer, and there obviously was a lot of discussion about this, a lot of discussion about the effectiveness of the organization that's currently administering the $4 million budget that was given to the arts by the state. And I think there was in terms of the grants that they gave, the average was like $7,500. Can you tell me what this will do to size the budget effectively for this, and what the average grant would be? I'm concerned about the politicization of spreading the budget over 156 counties just to honor the desires of the elected officials in those counties. Do you have any way of analyzing that, or was that considered when you went?
Not at all. The purpose, of course, by using the large amounts of the leveraged dollars at $5,000 for an individual and $10,000 for corporations is for them to be able to give more to the arts than they're currently being limited to, and this would do that.
I guess my question went to the vehicle that will be used that receives the money to expend it in an effective way. The control over that is of concern to me, and I don't know that the bill does not address that.
Actually, the bill in section beginning on number 17 on page 2, line 17. Excuse me, wrong page. No, that's right, 17. It goes into the direction of how the trust is going to be set up, its directors, and how its 30 members are going to be appointed.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, one other question I might follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Also, in the study committee report, there was a requested protection of the type of art that would have money spent on it by the state. The concern is that the Mapplethorpe types of things that have come along through National Endowment for the Arts and that type of thing, is there any protection in here against that? Because I think we had requested some audit type of capability by the state.
Actually, there's a wide variety. As you're looking on page...
It's the first time I've seen the bill, so I appreciate you helping with it.
On page 4, it explains beginning on page line 29, it lists several items for what the grants can be applied for, not to exclude the administration of the grants from public and private entities to fulfill purposes such as arts, even tourism organizations. for these grants, and it's really wide open as far as what these grants can be used for.
Okay, so there's no content assessment situation in here?
No.
That's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. Is there any further questions for the? Okay, seeing none, what's the pleasure of the committee?
Mr. Chairman.
Move to pass. Have a motion and a second. No further discussion. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Ladies and gentlemen, I've just been informed that we're under an emergency tornado watch or something of that nature. We're being asked to evacuate the building, so we will